Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Business of Inner Peace. I'm super excited to introduce you today to Kristin Fitch. She is a Christian encourager. She's a speaker, an author, a podcaster, and mentor who is on a mission to encourage women to realign their lives with what truly matters and what's been put on their heart by helping them live in joyful alignment and rediscover their passion and purpose. Her podcasts are Faith Fueled Woman and Building a Life You Love. Kristin is building a faith-based, inspirational lifestyle and education company to bring positive, inspiring, and faith-focused content and products to you, which includes books, workbooks, podcast shows, and coaching. Welcome to the Business of Inner Peace. I'm your host, Erin Jean, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's pretend we're sitting in my living room enjoying a cup of coffee or tea and getting to know each other just a little better. That's what I love. I love getting to hear your story. I love feeling connected by the spirit of understanding that our stories bring. Today, I'm sharing some of my story, but I hope someday soon you'll be telling me yours. Listen, I know that you're feeling overwhelmed with life and nothing is exactly how you'd like it to be. Your marriage is not what you hoped for. Motherhood is harder than you imagined, and you've lost yourself somewhere in the mix of responsibilities. Well, if you're ready to bring some more peace and joy into your life, reconnect with God who made you, and start living a life you love, then grab your cup of coffee or tea, and let's dive into today's show. I'm so excited to have you here. Kristin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin. I'm so excited to have this conversation today with you and your audience.
Yay, me too. Well, I love stories. I always love knowing what got someone to where they are today. So I know that you are not wanting to create this level of change in women's lives without having experienced some in your own. So tell us about that.
Absolutely. Well, so I think the main or the big thing I think I'd share is that when right before I had children, I worked for a media company. So it was like a regional newspaper and online publishing company. And when I was there, I loved my job, but I had two little kids, and I had a little side hustle with my mom. She's an artist, and so I was representing her. But what happened is when I was about to I was pregnant with my third child, I was like, you know what, I can always come back and have a corporate job, but I can't always pursue this other job. And of course I would like to be home with my kids more. So I left that company and I started this company with my mom in 2008 called Ziggity Zoom, which we still own, but it's an early education technology company. So we did online mobile games for kids, and we did workbooks for parents and teachers, and we still have that company, so it still exists. But when I was doing all of that, I kept feeling more called to serve women in how I did in my personal life, which is I'm always the friend and the person that people would come to. They would want to share things with. They would want my advice. And so I always had that role in my personal life. And then I did at work too, right? My team members would always come to me. They would want guidance, but I was never doing it as my career. And so as I was working in this company with my mom and building this early education company, I liked the content because I had young children, but my heart was calling me to be somewhere else. And where it started to call me was to write and do some blogging that was more about, making change in our lives, and then kind of stepping into what God has for us. And so I started slowly doing some writing and some different things like that, but it just became kind of like something I couldn't ignore, that I was really being called to create positive content and then also really help all of us step into what I say is the adventure that God's calling us into, because I don't think he wants us to live mundane lives. I think he wants us to keep stepping into more. And so I then a couple of years ago took another full-time job temporarily as a full-time consultant for 3 years in my background, marketing technology. Basically, it's what it's in. And from that, when I was in the company, I was like, I know that I have to get back to what I started working on, which was this encouraging faith-based inspirational content. And so that's when I said, I have to step back into doing my stuff full time. And so 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, that's basically what I did. I stepped back in full time to starting my first podcast, Building a Life You Love. And then months after that, I started Faith Fueled Woman. And I'll just tell you one last thing. When I started Faith Fueled Woman, it was actually called Spark of Faith. I didn't tell anyone about the second podcast because it was a faith one. And I've always had faith, but I never was somebody that would just, that's all I wanted to talk about. I was a little bit hesitant, a little bit scared. And I put it out there. And one morning I was laying in bed and my husband, it was his alarm clock going off, but he was still sleeping. And I'm sitting there thinking about the work and the content. And I literally had his alarm clock go off and say, nothing before, nothing after, no music, and just said, give glory to God. And I was like, what in the world, right? I've never had anything like that happen before or after. And I was like, wow, okay. Like maybe I need to take this serious, And so anyways, fast forward a couple more months and I stepped into doing Faith Fueled Woman podcast. I rebranded it and I got serious about, really producing that and then putting the content out there. And so that's what I've been doing. And then along the way, I've started creating workbooks, working on devotional, and then doing some mentoring and coaching with women. But really along the way, it was always a change, right? Being willing and being curious enough to say like, well, what do I need to do? Or how can I start tapping into the next thing? How can I just try this? And so that is my journey in making changes, which was, I just kind of listened to, what I thought God was calling me to or my heart and said, how can I do something to move towards this feeling or this idea or the change that I want to have happen?
Yeah. So outside of kind of like these projects and changing where you are working, did you have any other like big life changes that brought you to this work?
I mean, not like some people's stories, right? Like I haven't gone through a huge diagnosis. I haven't, I've been married for almost 25 years. So in those ways, no, like nothing's changed. Other than going away to college, I live in my same, city that I've lived in. And so I think it's more for me, it's been subtle things or things where it didn't feel aligned, like things didn't feel aligned for me. And so I think for me, that's more where the changes happened where, I was really good. And if any of you read the book, The Big Leap, by
I love that one. Gay Hendricks.
Yes. And so he talks a lot about, the zone of excellence and the zone of genius. Well, in all the marketing and online stuff I did, the technology stuff, and even the early education company, I was really good at all that work. Like I'm really good at so many things, but it wasn't filling my heart. And so for me, it was that continuous feeling that I was living multiple parts of Kristin, so I felt very fragmented or very like Kristin Faith over here. And Kristin's like, she likes personal development and coaching over here. And then she has this company over here. It felt very separate. And I kept trying to figure out, how do I bring all of my interests and all my work together? And so I think for me, it wasn't a outside in the world, big event. It was the event of feeling very fragmented and needing to bring it together to feel it more at peace, actually.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you're almost on this journey of learning to listen to the Holy Spirit's prompting, kind of guiding you to this place. I'm like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what it sounds like.
Well, that, and then just like knowing that I needed to step into something where I could talk about faith, but I could help people improve their lives, and it could all be together, right? It didn't have, it shouldn't be, and it didn't have to be fragmented, but having worked in corporate, for some of us, right, that's kind of how it feels, because there's sort of some guidelines in a lot of companies where, you don't talk about your faith, at least not in the same type of way. And so I think that's part of where that came from because of my background.
Yeah. I also find this very unique that you were so interested in personal growth. Like that's kind of rare. What got you into that?
I think it's for me. Okay. So I should tell you one other thing. Like my whole life, I've been the person that like loves Christian encouragement books, inspiration books. Like I literally have so many. I'm like, I need to build another library. So I buy them all the time. I mean, I buy business books too, but that's something that I say, there's unique signals about us, right? That are different than maybe one of your friends, because I have a lot of friends that do not have any interest in reading books like that, right? Like I read books that they're like, what book are you reading right now? Like, how is your soul and things like that? And so that's the first thing is I've always had an interest, even since I was probably like an older teenager, in that kind of content. And I think the personal development for me, it kind of meshes. I know some people think it doesn't. It's the opposite. But for me, it comes together because, the Christian inspiration or biblical teachings is the crux, but then the other stuff is kind of like, but how do I actually implement something different in my life? And so I think for me, I like how those two things can come together, actually.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. And it can feel really fragmented because that whole personal development world, maybe you'd label it more as like spirituality or something, right? They don't often acknowledge God or, they're more about like the universe. And
Well, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And then you've got this other world where when you really break it down, like you're looking at the Bible and everything, like it is personal growth. Like God is asking us to be better and to try to imitate Jesus, which requires, right, a lot of change to walk in his footsteps. So they are very similar, but it's funny how I think you're spot on that it's often like fragmented. So I was just curious because I haven't met many people that aren't like in specific niches that love personal growth. So made me curious. Well, I would love to have you talk with the audience today about change and about steps that we can all take to implement change in our lives and maybe even steps of like how to be aware that there's even something to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love that. So a quote I'll share with you first is by Peter McWilliams, and he says, the willingness to do creates the ability to do. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And so I've tried to kind of put it into 4 bite-sized steps that you can take if you are thinking, maybe one, you're wanting to make a change, or you're just not sure, but you feel like maybe something in your life or God's calling you to something else. So these are 4 things you can do to start, making an observation and then stepping into making change. So basically, I'm calling them the 4 A's of making a life change, just to keep it simple.
I love that.
So the first one is attitude. And so what we're talking about is that willingness. So do you have a willingness or an openness or a readiness to make a change in your life? And it can be in any area. We'll get into that in a few minutes. And so the first thing is attitude, or some people, you might call it mindset. But am I willing? Like, am I either fed up with something, or am I just feeling uneasy, or is there an area that's stressing me out? So, right, it's kind of, you're trying to figure out, do I have an attitude that I'm willing or ready to make a change? So that's really the first question. It's kind of a reflective question. The next part we're going to step into is an audit, right? So that's your next A. And it's basically, you're going to audit the areas of your life. And you can do this a lot of ways. You can either just say, I already know I'm really frustrated and fed up with my career. So maybe you don't need to do a whole audit of all the different groups or categories or buckets. Then you can just do it on that one category. But if you're somebody that's like, I'm not sure what needs to change, but I know some different things need to change. So then you can kind of, and there's different buckets, but we'll just do some of the big ones. To write down, career, health, relationships, faith, growth, finance, whatever those big things are in your life. And I would say for health, it's not just physical health. It's physical, but it could be psychological, emotional, mental, right? Because sometimes what we need to change is something that's going on maybe in our mind or something else. And so we write those down, and then we just start figuring out where am I struggling? Where am I not where I want to be? Or where am I super stressed out? Or where do I know I'm ready to make a change? Or I know there has to be a change. Let's say it's in your marriage. Let's say you're really having a hard time in your marriage. Well, then you need to circle that, identify that. Maybe you don't know how to do something about it, but you know that that's an area you need to make a change in some way. So really what we're doing is we're identifying under the audit, we're identifying where is something I need to work on, or I want to work on, have a change, and that I'm possibly willing to make some change, but I don't know what the change is yet. Okay, so those are your first 2 things. The third one, the third A, is ask. So we want to ask different questions. We want to reframe what we might be doing to ourselves. So these are the things like, maybe right now you're saying like, well, what if I try to get a new job and it doesn't go well? Or what if I don't get hired? Or what if I start a business and I don't make enough money, right? So it's all the, if you will, they're kind of the more negative. A lot of us tend to run and jump into these negative questions, right? Fear-based, if you will. So we want to reframe them and see if we can shift them to a positive question. So what if this worked out? Like, what if I started this side hustle or a business and it turned, into I could be home or have more flexibility, or I could pay for this bill or this vacation? What if my health improved because I was willing to work with somebody to help me, right? Or change my diet or something. So some of the questions that I like for people to write down and think about are, first of all, why am I doing this? Why do I want to make this change? Because whenever we have a big, important why, we're more likely to make the change. So for instance, I've tried to, walk more steps this last year every day. And if my why was just like to walk more steps, I might not stick to it. But if I know the health benefit, both of living longer and for my health metrics, if I walk more, right? So for me, I hopefully can live a long life and see one day grandkids and things like that. So my why is that I want to be healthy later in life. Okay. So why am I doing this, or why do I want this change? 2 is, what if it works out? Ask yourself that. Number 3 is, how will this improve? How will this change? How will making this change my life? How could it change my life? And the 4th question is, what am I afraid of? In other words, what's holding me back from making this change that maybe I know I've needed to make, but I'm not willing? So those are the questions, okay, to ask. And then the 4th step is taking action, right? That's your 4th A. And it's, if you've decided now, I'm willing, I know I need to make a change, and I know this area is what I want to work on, or maybe you need to know more specifically, the action is deciding what's your next step and then setting a goal and a deadline. Now, let me be clear. Let's just use the example of marriage. You can know, okay, I need to work on my marriage because maybe we keep blowing up at each other and having arguments. And I know that our marriages can survive this, but I just know we can improve. We need to improve our communication. That's fine. You don't need to know all the steps. You just need to know, okay, that's the steps. And maybe the next step is I need to do some research, or maybe I need to look into working with a marriage counselor or get a marriage book. So you don't have to know the right answer, because there's usually not a right answer. You just have to know that you're going to take action, right? Like maybe it's spend 30 minutes this week looking at marriage tips or tools, things like that. Or asking friends like, hey, have you found anything that was really encouraging for marriage, like a marriage devotional or something? And then really but you're trying for your action step, it's pick a micro change, right? Pick a really small step. You're not trying to go from, I know I need to make a change, and then all of a sudden your marriage is perfect the next day, right? It's small steps. You're just setting the intention, deciding you want to do it, and then taking one step in that direction. Okay. Because to make a change, it's going to take you longer than that. And then really, I just say, set up a signal, a prompt, or an accountability measure. So this is something like, okay, for me, I wear the, watch that gives me my steps. So there's no avoiding how many steps I got in every day. So for me, that's my signal and my accountability prompt. For somebody else, it might be you talk to your spouse and then you guys have decided, okay, we're going to make sure once a week we're getting together, not with the kids running around us, not with, so you're going to have alone time, either to talk or to go through a resource. So you're setting up either an accountability partner, or you're setting up a signal, like a reminder on your calendar, but you're doing something that's going to help you commit to starting to make this change. And so that's the action step. So those are the 4 steps. But if you start there, this is the path to begin making a change. Obviously, it doesn't get you from beginning to the end, but it's the path forward to starting to make a change.
I love that. That's so helpful. I especially love the micro action, because otherwise, if it's too big, you get so overwhelmed by the thought of feeling like you can't do it, right, that you won't take a step forward. So I really love that tip of the micro action. And sometimes I think it's funny, like I've noticed that people get really, really content and to me, that can often sort of be the evidence that change is required when you're a little too content. I'd love for you to weigh in on that part.
So I have an amazing quote by a pastor. She's at Substance Church, her and her husband, but her name's Carolyn Haas. And I think I think what she said, it was in a sermon. She said, your comfort zone, hold on, it's something like your comfort zone is basically, it's keeping you out of, your comfort zone is basically the enemy of joy. But she basically says, our comfort is keeping us out of getting into God's zone. And so the point though is we need strategic discomfort, right? Is what she's talking about, meaning that yes, we aren't meant to just be comfortable every day of our lives and never do anything new. We do need to get out of our comfort zone, and we do need to be willing to push ourselves, stretch ourselves. And so that's why, like we talked about earlier, I think faith and personal development actually go so well together, because some of us maybe can just read your Bible and you can be like, yes, I'm going to be more brave today. But for me, I need little things to help. Like I created for myself and others, like something called Bold 30, that it's just doing one small thing every day that stretches you to do something that you didn't, like, you're like, I don't know, I don't want to ask that person, for instance, to be on my podcast, but you're like, but I'm going to do it because I have a little sheet that helps me say, I'm going to do one thing that puts me even for 2 minutes out of my comfort zone. So for me, just find little ways to keep stretching you, especially if you're doing it to, like you're using your gifts, right, for what you're being called to. And so absolutely, we have to get out of our comfort zone, and because that keeps us stuck. And I think the whole thing is, in life, if you're not growing, you're not thriving, right? And so, in other words, the opposite of thriving is stagnant. And God's not calling for anything in his kingdom to be stagnant. I mean, the plants are never stagnant. There's seasons, but there's always preparation, waiting, or growth. But, so I think that's what we're expected to do as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. And not to pick on men, because I'm sure there's women out there too, but I've come into more men in my life that they love this phrase of, I'm like, this is how I've always been. Like, I'm consistent, right? Like this is,
So
and
right.
they get to the point where they almost wear it with like some honor and pride in that, like, you can count on me. I'm consistent. This is the way it always is. And I actually said to my husband the other day, but on no one's gravestone does it say, like, he died and he was just the same old guy that we always, right? It's like not actually an accomplishment. And I really been noticing in people's lives, like when you get like too content and everything, you're like just good with it is, it's kind of like a little red flag that maybe there's a spot that you need to grow and change, because people that have really made impact on the world were not people that were striving to be the same exact every single day.
We're called to be uncomfortable, actually. I mean, you're right. I mean, in other words, we can expect that at some points in our life, it's going to be hard or it's going to be uncomfortable. I mean, it's just nature being a human, first of all, right? And so there's that. But you're so right. My husband does that, actually. Like, I'll be like, I'll say something and he'll be like, well, you already know that. Like, I like that he loves sports and he gets way too upset about games sometimes on TV. And I'm like, you just are so over the top about it. And he's like, well, I've been like that like my whole life. And he tries to, and I'm like, but we might actually watch sports with you if it was more fun. Like, it's our dog left the room the other day. And I was like, babe, like, seriously, the dog left the room because you were yelling at the television. I was like, seriously, maybe.
Yeah.
This needs to change, and it's team's losing. But he says that all the time, by the way. And I'm just like, oh boy.
It's so funny. I think men, there's an aspect of it where it's really good because you do want that sturdy, I can count on you. But there's also this part where it's like, I just want to encourage you to grow and change a little and think about your legacy, right? Because legacy doesn't come from, I was the person that always did this.
Often I feel like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, talk to us a little bit about that willingness part that you mentioned at the beginning, because I'd love to leave our audience with a tool on how to figure that out.
So for now, I have 3 questions you can ask yourself, kind of determining your willingness number. You could definitely add more to this list, but just to keep it simple. So let's say you're looking at something you might want to change in your life, or maybe you have 2 or 3 areas, right? In those different buckets that you want to change. But let's be realistic. Most of us aren't going to change all of them at once. So at some point we have to decide, what are we going to step into now, making a change? So this is how that's where it can help you. So what's your willingness number? Ask yourself, so get a piece of a paper and a pen, ask yourself these 3 questions, and you're basically going to rate them a 1 to 5 for each one. So the first one is, how willing am I to make this change? The one that you've already identified, with the other questions, or audit. And so then answer 1 to 5. Am I 1 being, I'm not really that willing, or 5 being, I'm willing, let's start today, right? So you just want to answer that question. The next one is, how willing am I to start on this change? So, right, because we have to know that we're willing to do it. It's not just a future thing we want to change, because sometimes we might know we want to change your job, but today's not the right day, right? Even maybe this year's not the right year, but in the future. Well, that's going to tell you that that's a future goal or change you want, but it's not for right now. And so you want to write down 1 to 5, same thing. If you're, at a 5, you're probably ready to start looking at kind of what are the options out there? What are the types of jobs? If you're at a 1, then you might even write down why. Is it because financially your family can't do that, in the next 6 months or whatnot? The third question is, am I willing to take action? Am I ready for disruption? Because they say, I've heard a lot of people say this, but it's disruption follows intention. So knowing that you make an intention and you make a change, things are going to be shaken up. And so you have to be ready for that. So am I ready to take action knowing that means something in my life will be disrupted? We won't be comfortable, if you will. And so then answer 1 to 5. And then when you basically add up those 3 numbers, and if you're between 10 and 15, but especially 11 or 12 and 15, then you're probably ready to take action on that step or that goal or that area that you identified in the other area. Then start moving forward with a micro step, one tiny thing. And if you're not, then, table the ideas, keep it in a journal for the future so that you can come back and check on these things. And then when it's time, you can actually, take that step towards that other change that you'd like to see during the year.
I love that. That's a great way to really help you make some decisions about what to move forward on or not.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, tell us where our audience can connect with you and especially tap into these amazing resources that you're creating.
Absolutely. So the best place is just go to my website, kristinfitch.com. And if you go to kristinfitch.com/freebies, or just go to the freebies and business tools page, I have several free workbooks that you can download, and 2 that you might enjoy in particular. One is basically about doing a life audit to step into living your most joyful, best year or best future yet. And then the other one is calling Reignite Your Passion. And so that's a workbook about helping you identify what are your priorities and values, what is God calling you to, and then what is it that you really want to step into in your future. So those are both great resources that you can grab over on my website.
Awesome. Well, is there anything you want to leave our audience with before we go?
I think I would just encourage people, like you mentioned, it's actually exciting to get out of our comfort zone. And, I think the more we do it, and the more exciting and more used to we get it, right? It's a muscle like anything else. The more we use our muscle of learning, growing, stretching ourselves, getting curious about things, the more it becomes a little easier. And so I would just encourage people, learn about what are you curious about? What do you want to change? And sometimes these ideas start with just listening to a podcast, reading a book, reading a quote, having a conversation with someone new. Because I've talked to people where there was one woman, she was a teacher. She didn't even know what other types of jobs existed because her whole life she wanted to teach until her kids were a little older. And she said, I really like to have more flexibility. She became a VA, but the point is she didn't even know that was a job that existed until she started looking at new things. And so I would just encourage anybody that maybe feels stuck or stagnant in part of their life just to get curious, and you'll start uncovering things that you didn't even know were available to you.
I love that. And I also want to just tag on to this that I have noticed that God has made people like you and I unique in that we were born encouragers, and maybe change is something that's always been exciting to us, or growing and becoming new and different each day is exciting. But I know there's people out there where like you say the word change and they cringe and they're like, I hate change, and it makes them feel stressed. I think that partnering up, even if it's just a friend, right, that that is great at encouragement or really likes change, just partnering up with them and letting them know what you're attempting to do, because I think you and I are cut from the same cloth, where it brings joy to encourage people on that path. And I think asking for help and moving toward relationship, especially when you're trying to create change in your life, is a big benefit. So I loved what you said because it just inspired me to like, you should ask for help too.
Well, and if you don't mind, I'll add one thing to that. For some people, I know they say they go on social sites and, the data's in, right? It says a lot of people you'll feel worse after visiting those sites. But I would just share with you, for instance, Instagram is where I spend more of my time when I'm on social, but I've just curated it. So all the content I see are people that I want to see their messages, right? So it's either about home and food things. It's about faith. It's about, encouragement, self-development, but it's all the things that I want to see. And so even if, first of all, always find a friend that you can help support you and cheer you on. I think we all need that. But then two, curate the people you're following, the books you're reading, the podcast, because those things actually make us say, if they did it, I actually can do it too. Because how many times have you heard a friend say, well, when I saw another friend say that she went and did this thing I didn't think she could do, I mean, she never had wanted to before. It made me feel like maybe I could do that too. And so, just make sure you're aligning with content too that helps encourage you and build you up to know that you can do these things, even if you're a little bit afraid right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. There's that saying like the 5 people that are closest to you have the greatest influence. And I think we're living in this day and age, right, where actually one of the like quote unquote people is this technology, right? Because the person could be social media, it could be a podcast, but they are pouring into your life and you're hearing them. So I love this idea of curating it. In fact, that makes me laugh. I was on TikTok and my sister would send me stuff and I was like, I can't go on there anymore. Every time I turn it on, it's like something I don't want to see. And she goes, well, don't you like the stuff that I send you? I'm like, no, I just look at it and move on. She said, you have to start liking it so it'll change your feed. And sure enough, it did. But some people don't know that's happening. So you literally can curate what you want to see and influence what you want to see by the things that you like and choose to follow. I love that idea. It is now officially like the other source of the people that are closest to you, right?
So great. Yeah.
Well, it has just been so fun getting to know you and talk with you today. Thank you for all the value you added to our lives. I know for sure that someone has a huge takeaway from what we've talked about, and just praying that God continues to bless everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. It was great being with you and your listeners today.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're feeling blessed by the content here, the number one way you can show me is by leaving me a written review of the show. I'd be forever grateful. Knowing that you're out there listening helps me know that I'm truly living out God's purpose in my life. The other thing you can do is take a screenshot of this episode, share it with a friend, or better yet, tag me on your Instagram stories. Remember, you are seen, known, and loved. May God richly bless you today. All my love, Erin Jean.